Whole You podcast listeners, it's Dr. Janine Krause from the Health Fix podcast. It's a podcast where I talk about tips, tricks, and techniques to have sharp minds, limitless energy, and fit physiques for life. Check out episode 157 of the Happy Whole You podcast, where I talk about personalized wellness for slowing down the aging process. You're listening to the Happy Whole You podcast. Let's introduce you to Dr. Anna Marie Frank.
All right, Kaely, thank you for joining me on the Happy Whole You podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you on because we're going to talk about a whole lot of different things, and you and I align in a lot of different areas. But first, can you share with the audience who you are, how you got to the space that you're in, and yeah, all the good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Kaely McDevitt. I'm a women's health dietitian, and I've really been in that space for the last decade, but I had no intention of being in that space when I set out on my schooling. I had plans to work in sports nutrition. I grew up being an athlete. I had a brief stint as a marathon runner, and that was just kind of where my passion was lying at the time. But while I was in school getting these credentials, I was dealing with a ton of hormone health symptoms. I was put on birth control really young. I was dealing with a lot of issues with that, and ultimately ended all of my schooling with a credential and had never felt worse. And I was
a credential in health, by the way.
Yeah, right. And to be clear, I was like very meticulously applying everything I was being taught too. So I was like, man, I should be the vision of health, and I really wasn't. So I like entered the field feeling like an absolute fraud. Talk about imposter syndrome at that time. And essentially I had to spend all of my free time as a baby dietitian learning about women's health and the menstrual cycle and how nutrition can impact our sex hormones, and where things like early birth control use, my not eating enough and exercising too much really led me to a state of really extreme depletion. And so eventually found my way back to myself, and I was sharing this kind of information on a blog at this point. And it became clear to me then that there were a lot of other women in my life that were hungry for that kind of information. So pivoted toward women's health and have been there ever since, and love working in this space.
Awesome. I love that. And I love that I find people that are really helping people with true application of what health is versus just the medical field of health. They're doing it from a need of healing themselves, which is really great.
Yeah.
So can you just explain to people though, so they may be like, okay, there's a dietitian and then there's nutritionist and health coaching. Like what is a dietitian? What is your education? Like what are they teaching you that you're kind of questioning, like just all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, I know it's really confusing, all the different names
Yeah.
of these. So there are a ton of different certifications that would lead someone to be a nutritionist or something in that space. But to be a dietitian requires a 4-year bachelor's degree in dietetics, a year-long clinical internship, a board exam, and it's actually master's required now. It wasn't when I was in school, but it is now. And it is the only regulated and board credentialed nutrition practitioner option that's out there now. And with that comes some key responsibilities and privileges that were attractive enough to go down that really long, expensive path to become this. But because of the fact that it is a credentialed and regulated professional path, there's a lot of really outdated information still being taught in that curriculum. We were using my plate at that point. I had just gone from my pyramid to my plate when I was in school to be a dietitian, and it's just really outdated information. I think that the stat on this is that it takes like 17 years from new research to change standard of care. So it just felt like really old school nutrition advice, big onto the like grains and starches being the foundation of our diet, really, really small reliance on fat, and a lot of processed foods in lieu of real foods. So I definitely had some moments throughout my education where I was questioning what was being taught, and then had to kind of reevaluate my food philosophy after all was said and done.
Yeah. Now, I'm pretty skeptical. So when it comes to mainstream, like medical and what we're
Same.
teaching at universities. And do you think that they are going to actually change and research the fact that, wheat, GMOs, and I think it's 51% of our school lunches for our children have to be whole, quote unquote,
Yeah.
whole grain. Um, and then the dairy industry and like all of that. Do you think that they're going to actually start to change that within the universities?
Probably not, sadly. I feel pretty jaded about that now. And
Yeah,
I think we could probably have a whole podcast on just why that is and the funding that's related to the curriculum writing. And I
yeah,
just think we're in a tricky spot there where I don't have any expectation of that changing,
yeah.
sadly.
Interesting. Okay. And then, so as a dietitian too, uh, you can work with people and take insurance. You can, but you have to follow a very specific diet protocol. This is like when
Mhm.
people go to the hospital and they're getting
Yeah.
Jello and they're getting like
Yeah.
all of these carcinogenic foods.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so that's what a dietitian is, someone that's working more in the medical
Right.
setting, correct? And so you went to school for a very long time to do this, learned that, yeah, this is not working well.
Mm-mm.
And
Mhm.
so then you started to research your own and started to, go into a more, would you say it's a more nutritionist approach, or what would you say is like your approach now? And like, how has it changed since, I guess, when you started,
Yeah.
got out of university to what you're doing now?
Yeah, a lot has changed. And like you mentioned, the classic role for dietitian is in the hospital setting. And I spent a year doing that during my internship. And it was abundantly clear that that's not where I wanted to be or where I felt like I could really impact somebody. So moved into private practice so that I would have the ability to practice differently. And so from a food perspective, really moving away from like the processed just like fake foods that are being recommended and are so pervasive, like you mentioned, even starting with kids' lunches at school, to a more ancestral approach to nutrition where we're really focusing on food as close to nature as possible, big emphasis on quality animal products, plenty of great fats, just like food that has energy.
Mhm.
And then I moved away from that insurance model to a fully cash-based practice because, again, I couldn't practice the way I wanted to with the regulations that I would have to stay with if I were to be billing to insurance. There's such a limited amount of things that dietitians can bill insurance for. And things that we work on with our clients in the women's health space are far outside of that. So I think it went from like a dietitian role to more of like a holistic health coaching perspective where we're looking at the whole person, not just what they're
Mhm.
eating, but how are they moving through their day? How are they living? How are they thinking? How are they breathing? And just a bigger, more zoomed out picture.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's great. So how are you, like, say you have someone come to you, what are some typical things that you're finding that people are struggling with, and what are some like key things that you're doing to help them shift out of those struggles?
Yeah, so we serve primarily reproductive age women. So we're looking at most of our clients being in their 20s to mid 40s. And they're typically coming to us with cycle symptoms. So either a lot of symptoms with their cycle or it's irregular or absent. They're coming to us with infertility. They're coming to us wanting to proactively support their fertility or coming to us with this sluggish metabolism picture. So a lot of fatigue, a lot of unexplained weight gain, just feeling like they've lost that vibrance for life. And so no matter what they're coming to us for, we look at some lab testing initially so we can understand their physiology better and not have to play this guess and check game with food and lifestyle and supplements, which can really burn people out if you're trying so hard to feel better. And I'm sure you experience this in your practice too. One of the most frustrating things about nutrition is how different it is from person to person.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Ugh, I wish it was the same, but it isn't.
Yeah. I always say that like at the end of the day, we know it's healthy and unhealthy,
Yeah,
right? But is your body reactive or non-reactive? Because a lot
right.
of people don't realize that there's an inflammatory response that you could have towards, say, something like almonds or seeds
Mhm.
or whatever. And the next person doesn't have that response. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's just being in touch with your body, I think. So, so
totally.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we love getting to do some testing with our clients, help them understand themselves better, create some grace for symptoms. I think we can get caught up in the idea that we should never have symptoms in our life. And I think if we can reframe that to symptoms are just our body's way of communicating that something needs attention, we can come at this from like a partnership with our body versus being at odds with our body.
Yeah.
And we love lab data as a way to just really understand ourselves better. And then that'll guide our interventions from a food, lifestyle, and supplement perspective.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I love that. And are you finding that like obviously you specialize in the fertility arena and women's reproductive health, but I know just for myself, I am finding more and more women, young people coming in and they're not able to get pregnant. And I know that,
Yeah.
you're working with the women and men, there's been I think it's been a 50% drop in sperm
Yeah.
rate since the 1970s, which is a whole nother thing. So it's not always the woman, but I like my mind is blown at how many young people are not able to get pregnant.
Same. It's actually really, really scary.
Yeah. So with that, what are you doing? I'm sure you have success stories of helping women
Mhm.
get pregnant. What are you doing for those women that are struggling with infertility? Do you find there are certain things that are like go to? I know everybody's different,
Yeah.
but I know there's a couple things that I found that doesn't matter who's in front of me, like this has been working for them.
Yeah.
Have you found any of that?
Yeah. So with our clients, really across the board for reasons why they're coming to us, but especially fertility clients, it's an energy issue, right? Like if we think about carrying life and how much
Mm-hmm.
energy that requires and how much nutrient level that requires, if we're coming into this experience or chapter of life depleted or burnt out or just not topped off on nutrient levels, we're going to have a really hard time making this process happen smoothly. And the body is so smart, it's not going to proceed with pregnancy if there isn't enough energy and nutrient around to support a new life. And I think if I were to distill down kind of the theme that we're seeing with people today, men and women, it's just this lack of energy or vibrance because we're eating fake food. We're working in environments where we're essentially in captivity. We're like in front of computers under fluorescent light.
Yeah.
We're never getting outside. We're not moving. So it feels like a big energy deficiency thing. So we'll look at that in a couple of different ways. So we'll look at micronutrient levels and especially minerals. We love doing hair tissue mineral analysis with our clients because minerals help kick off enzyme reactions in our cells. And we'll look at thyroid labs in great detail too. And something that's pretty alarming that we see all the time is women that have been through sometimes multiple rounds of IVF. So they're tens of thousands of dollars into this fertility process without success, have never had a full thyroid panel done.
Mm.
And how can we expect the body to carry a pregnancy if we can't create energy, which is really what the thyroid's job is. So I think that's kind of the biggest overarching theme that we see.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Isn't it funny how like some stuff that is just like so apparent and like why are we
Yeah.
not looking at this? And we think it's like a huge mystery and it's like always going back to the basics.
Hmm.
Sunlight,
Yeah.
nutrition, you know, it, movement,
Hmm.
positive conversations, good relationships, and then checking for understanding, getting lab work or doing different types of testing. And oh my gosh, I know it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
What are some, so people might be saying, well, yeah, I am feeling burnout
Mhm.
and maybe my minerals are deficient, or how would I know that? Maybe they haven't been tested. Or like, what should people be doing to essentially replenish their minerals, to replenish themselves, and to avoid that burnout?
Yeah, I like to think of it in terms of stressors that are within our control and stressors that aren't. There are a handful of ones that we can manipulate, and we'll talk about those. And then there are a handful of ones that are just kind of like coming with this season of life. And I don't think most of our clients are able to like take a sabbatical from work just because they're working on health. If they can, that's amazing, but there's certain stressors that are just going to be on that plate. So for those, we really have to work on building that resilience to stress, which can be cultivated. But as far as the ones that are within our control that we always start with, the first is the way that we eat. So if we are not eating enough, whether that's on purpose or not, and a lot of our burnt out, really busy, high achieving women are just accidentally not eating enough throughout the day because they're just going 100 miles an hour. Yeah, been there too. Been there too. It's easy to slip into that.
Yeah.
And especially if recovering from burnout or supporting fertility is on the list of goals for you, we have to have enough energy coming in to create that baseline level of safety in the body where it feels secure enough to support fertility, to support hormone production and ovulation. So we'd look at that first. We want to make sure that there's enough nourishment coming in, that that food is comprised of things that are real and as close to nature as possible, that we can actually get energy and nutrients from, and that it supports stable blood sugar levels. Fluctuating blood sugar throughout the day is another major stressor on the body that is within our control. So we want to get away from those big peaks and valleys and just have nice rolling hills of blood sugar throughout the day. After we do that, we start to look at minerals. And if we didn't test for minerals, so if this is just somebody listening that hasn't done this before, there are a lot of really easy ways we can start with this. One of them is to actually start using like real salt in your diet.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's so easy.
So easy, almost free, like this is a very low cost support here. And I think the last several decades came with a lot of salt fearing. I know that was a part of my curriculum back in school, and we need it. It's crazy. It's crazy to me, but we need it to make digestive juices so we can actually extract nutrients from our food. We need it to get actual hydration and fuel into our cells. So you can start by adding a pinch of a good unrefined salt to your water, of course, cooking with it, flavoring food with it. Particularly for those high stress, high achieving women, getting more salt can have a pretty immediate impact on that energy.
Yeah, because they're going to be craving the chips and the salty stuff anyways. That is your body telling you like you need real salt. And so for those of you listening, we're not talking about the table salt that you get when you go to a restaurant or Morton salt. We're talking about the Celtic salts. I think it's the Mirage salt. It's hand harvested salts that you can get. Redmond's Real Salt's another one that comes, I think, out of Idaho or something,
like Utah. It's
Utah,
somewhere in that vicinity.
somewhere. But these these salts haven't been stripped of all their minerals, is why we're saying this. And these are water hungry molecules as well. So they're going to help to actually hydrate the body, which is the complete opposite of about what you were taught in school, that, but the wrong salt will dehydrate you. The right salt will help hydrate you. Yeah, for sure. So,
and it tastes good too, right? Like food is
so
more enjoyable.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love it. I buy it in bulk, like literally bulk, and I'll just like put it in my mouth like throughout the day. Just like, oh, okay, like and the more I've increased my dosage, the more I find like if a day I don't get it, I actually notice a difference as well. So, yeah, thanks for that reminder. That's a good one. Yeah.
And so easy. It's nice. So yeah, the salt thing is big. I like to get some potassium sources in our clients that are feeling this way too. And we do this primarily with food. So fruit and root vegetables are going to be the best potassium sources. Broths are great too, whether it's bone broth or veggie broth. And once again, if we look back on the last several decades of like fad diets and nutrition, we probably cut out fruit and root vegetables for a long period of time.
Right? Like yeah, I know. It's crazy to me that we think that this is like, I know. We make it's like nutrition is actually pretty easy.
It is.
It's very easy, but I think it's like all the advertising and all of the big conglomerates that own all the packaged food, they've made it like so confusing. I've said this on here before, and I think, when we talk about like electrolytes, people think that you have to buy Gatorade or Powerade to get
Right.
electrolytes.
Yeah, I know.
Always like, yeah, get some watermelon, put some of that salt on the
Yeah.
watermelon. Like
Oh,
there's
so
so
good.
many, I know. So, yeah, I think that that's probably the biggest challenge is it's actually very simple
Hmm.
when it comes to nutrition. But we've made it into like this whole monstrosity of, people think, oh, if I eat a banana in the morning, like that's too much sugar and I'm gonna
Hmm.
gain weight.
Yeah,
Like, when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, "Really? You were told not to eat bananas?
I
Like,
know. It's
unless
a
you're
really,
allergic."
it's a sad time with nutrition, and it's not the fault of the consumer. Like we've literally been marketed to that
Oh,
you need to
yeah.
follow these rules and
Yes.
that you don't innately know. But I think the best skill set anybody can cultivate is that ability to trust yourself with these decisions. And the only way we can do this is to experiment. So if you've
Mhm.
been afraid of bananas because of the sugar content, maybe we'll spend a week or two having a banana and see how you feel. Is
Yeah.
energy better? Did you enjoy it? Do you feel good throughout the day? And when you can take that time to really tap in with how that feels in your body, now you have freedom because you don't need somebody else's rules.
Mhm.
And I think that that's the biggest thing. We just had decades of diet dogma that really disconnected us from that. What
Yeah.
should be a simple thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, it was, low fat or no
Yes.
fat.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh, our poor brains.
Yeah, it explains some hormone health mysteries for me that happened later in life if I had no fats, and we make our
Yeah.
hormones out of fat. So,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so people need to, 1, eat closer to the sources,
yep,
increase their mineral counts.
yep.
Um, this is gonna help for the body to function properly. And then what else to avoid that burnout?
Yeah, so I think honestly looking at the way that we're living our lives and doing some reflecting on, is this moving me toward the version of myself that I want to be or away? And I think this is the hardest part too, and it's why it's not the first thing that we start with, because we have to have that capacity to even have these types of conversations with ourselves. But, where could we create some boundaries that protect our energy? Where could we prioritize ourselves a little bit more in the day? Is our movement appropriate for the current season of life, or is it actually a stressor on the plate too? And I say this because a lot of our kind of type A, high achieving women that we work with are using really intense forms of exercise as a stress reliever in their busy day. And
Yeah.
this was me too. I mean, I was running
Yeah.
marathons while I was in
Same.
grad school.
Same.
It's crazy. Um, and I think, being honest about the fact that it is a stressor and we earn intensity through nourishment and recovery. So if nourishment and recovery aren't there, we really shouldn't be going, all out with our training either. It could be keeping us stuck. And then looking at our sleep too and circadian rhythm. Do we have room to protect our sleep quality a little bit more? Can we protect that sleep time frame? Can we see the sunlight in the morning to help and train that circadian rhythm? I think there's a lot of free things that we can do that make a big impact on burnout. And one of them is just seeing the sun, especially in the morning.
Mhm.
Bonus points if you can also be barefoot out there, but at a minimum, sun in your eyes.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I totally agree. What about, okay, so say there's I call these the in-betweeners. The people that they have energy, they're functioning pretty high level. They're fine. They don't really, maybe once in a while their period might seem a little off, or once in a while their energy feels low. Um, they don't have all the symptoms of their body
Mhm.
screaming at them yet.
Yeah.
What are those subtle things that the body is trying to like tap on your shoulder and say,
Hmm.
"Hey, what are those symptoms?" Like just for some
Yeah.
people that maybe aren't paying attention, like what are some things that they like be like, "Hey, pay attention when your body does X."
Oh, yeah. I love that question. If you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, so maybe you used to sleep through the night, now you're awake somewhere between like 1 and 3 a.m. Maybe you're getting up and peeing, or maybe you're just awake and your brain is just on for the day. that's usually my personal first tell that stress is now exceeding recovery for me, because my sleep just starts to get funky. So if your sleep has changed, that would be a clue that we're heading toward that eventual burnout state, but we're not quite there.
Mm-hmm.
Another one would be changes in food cravings. So you mentioned this earlier, the salty cravings are really common when we're depleting minerals due to stress and we're headed toward that burnout. I've also seen sweets cravings in this time frame too, because those stress hormones come in and mess with that blood sugar stability. So
Mm-hmm.
if you notice all of a sudden you're like, man, those chips are like irresistible, or I have this sweet tooth that I'm not used to having, those would be some clues. If you notice that your mental clarity is different throughout the day, you're like, I feel like I'm forgetting stuff. I'm not quite on it like I used to be. That would also be a clue. Feeling less of a desire to be active or do things in your life that bring you joy. We see a big disinterest or a total lack of hobbies in the burnt out state. So when we're in the in between, we might be losing some of that. And then hormone specific, like you mentioned, you might see, a symptomatic cycle or two. We typically see a loss of sex drive as we start to head towards burnout. So if we're noticing we're just like less and less interested, that would be another clue something might be going on.
Yeah. Oh, those are all great, because those are easy things to just kind of like, well,
Yeah,
I'll
busy
be
week.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be fine. One of the main questions I ask clients every time I meet with them, if they crave food, do you crave salty, sweet, both, or neither? And they
Mm,
always kind of look at me like, huh? And it's interesting because, if they're saying salty and then they like stick out their tongue and their tongue is quivering, it's like adrenals. These are
mm,
some
I like
holistic
that.
ways that I test to see what physical response the body's giving me. And then once they start to like restore, they'll ask the same question next time I see them, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not really having any cravings." Like
Amazing.
that simple question for people to just check in with themselves. I love that you said that, because that's a big, big shift,
Hmm.
when it comes to cravings. So I'm so glad you touched on that.
Same to you.
Um, okay, so what other good nuggets, if you were to leave
Mm.
our listeners with like three good nuggets for a better, most vibrant life, like what are those nuggets you would leave people with?
Yeah, so we've touched on the mineral thing a lot. And I think one of the easiest ways to make this part of your day is to have like one mineral rich beverage that you make and take with
Mm,
you for the workday. I always have something like that on my desk for busy or call days. And so we want to make sure that we've got potassium, sodium, and ideally a little magnesium in this mix too. We didn't talk about magnesium directly, but that's such a big one for
yeah,
most humans today. It's just so
yeah.
hard to get it through food alone, and we burn through it really fast with stress. So a couple easy ideas for this would be like coconut water with some salt and a squeeze of
Mm,
lime. And if you've got some magnesium powder, you can add that right to that mix, put it in a jar or a bottle and bring it with you for your busy day. It makes a world of difference if you typically feel pretty depleted by the end of a busy workday. If we bring some minerals into the mix, that energy stays nice and stable. And we can make like fun concoctions with it too. That's just one of
yes.
many ideas. More fun than just plain water. And we tend to feel a lot better with it. So I'd say bring a mineral rich beverage into your day. The second one, I would just say do something that brings you joy each day. And it's an action item we give our clients really often. And I feel like we get a lot of puzzled looks because it's not something tactical. It's not like eat more protein or something like that, which of course is
Yeah.
huge. But I just think it's part of that whole biological mismatch that we're living in right now, where humans are
Hmm.
not thriving in the current system because we're not supposed to be like this. We're not supposed to go through weeks at a time without doing something that was like creative or joyful that didn't
Yeah.
have an outcome associated with it. So just something that brings you joy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's I want to jump in because
Yeah.
whenever somebody is having blood sugar dysregulation, one of the things that we talk about is the lack of sweetness in their life and the lack
Oh,
of joy.
yeah.
Because I believe that every organ system has emotions that get stored there or are lacking. And I always say that organ system is going to quote unquote act out.
I love that.
And so when they actively seek out joy and things to bring in the sweetness back in their life beyond food, we start to see that they're not having the dips as much. And so that's so good that you say that because
Oh,
it's important. And people like take a paint class, like go take a dance class, like do something out of the ordinary that kind of feels like, oh my gosh, I feel uncomfortable, but once you're there, once you're doing it, it's like you leave and you're like, "Oh my gosh." Plus, it's so good for our brains too, that
mhm.
dopamine and to try something new and all that. So,
Oh,
I love that.
I love that you talk about that too. We use the same term, like the sweetness in life,
Mhm.
because it's supposed to be sweet. And I think especially for women, like softening into that feminine state, the feminine energy more often comes with like allowing you to receive the sweetness of life. And
Yes.
um, yeah, I think again, we're looking at essentially free or fun action items here. This isn't a supplement. This is something that's just adding
Yeah.
life, and just hugely important. I was just at a conference this weekend, and there were a couple health practitioners on a panel talking about like CGM data. And one of them was sharing something that I thought was interesting and relevant for this, that her diet and exercise, great, consistent, no change there. But she had a major stress change in her life where she was separated from community. Her husband was
Mm.
away for work, and she lost that community and joy piece of her life. And her blood sugars were in like the pre-diabetic range during that season. So I think we forget how much the lifestyle stuff really impacts the physiology.
Oh, yeah, totally. Absolutely. Okay, so mineral-rich drinks,
Yep.
easy to do. Put it in a mason jar, shake it up,
Mhm.
get going.
Yep.
Bring you more joy and the sweetness of life.
Yeah.
What would be your third
Mm.
tip?
This one feels boring compared to tip number two, but I would say really focusing on getting about 100 grams of protein
Oh,
a
I'm
day.
so glad you said
Yeah.
that.
We have to. It's not that fun, but especially for women, I just think that unless that's top of mind, we're typically not doing
Yes,
it.
100%. Like yeah, I agree. Anyone out there listening, like count your protein grams, even guys, like
Yeah.
count your protein grams because get busy and I didn't even realize
Hmm.
like I was not even knocking on the door of 100 grams a day
Hmm.
by the time I would get home at night. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, you have to make a conscious effort because if you're eating real whole foods, you actually consume quite a bit of food.
Right. I know. It can
That's
be
what people,
shocking at first.
yeah. Yeah, it's like the protein, I always say the protein, like number one, and then fiber uh, is also up there for me when I'm working with clients because,
Yeah.
if you're eating enough fiber, then you're eating real foods,
Right.
but protein and fiber help regulate your blood sugar too. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, protein is like where do you sneak in protein? Because, I mean, we all know like, meats and things like that, but where are some
Yeah.
other sources that you grab protein? Because some people might be able to say, well, I'm a vegetarian or vegan, like
Mm.
I don't know where I should get it at.
Yeah, that definitely gets trickier with the less options that we have. But
Yeah.
I bring in a lot of like dairy sources. So like cottage cheese and yogurt are really easy ways to bring some protein in where it's not like a ribeye or eggs.
Yeah.
The egg recommendation in the morning can get a little bit boring. And you need quite a few eggs if we're trying to get, about 30
Yeah.
grams a meal.
Yeah.
And you can do cottage cheese eggs, which is a favorite of mine too, where you cook cottage cheese into the eggs. So you don't need to have like 4 or 5 eggs to get to enough
Oh, okay.
protein. And then I'll use protein powders or collagen powders to add some protein to beverages, like tea or coffee in the morning. It's really easy to get an extra, 10 to 20 grams of protein that way. And then I'll do something similar at snack time too. Typically not having like actual meat as my snack in the middle of a day because I just don't have time to cook something at that time. But I like using powders in those instances.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm actually doing some blood work today, so I'm
Mm,
currently fasting. But my go-to is I do have 1 cup of coffee a day. I know it leaches minerals from the body, but that is my non-negotiable, and that's
I'm with you.
okay. So I do add I add a little bit of mushroom powder and I add
Yeah.
my chocolate protein powder.
Mm,
I like the Vital Protein
me too.
one. But that gives me another 20 grams of protein
Yeah.
during the day or in the morning. And then if I'm like in a hurry, I will grab a hard-boiled egg, or I do the mashed up avocado, and I can put when I mash it up, I can do another scoop of just the plain
Ooh,
Vital
smart.
Proteins,
Yeah.
and then I put hot sauce on there with my Celtic salt, and
Yum.
I literally just scoop it out of the outer layer of the avocado, and that to me, it's like I'm getting my fats, I'm getting my minerals, I'm getting my proteins.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I always say fast food can actually be like that's my fast food is like
Yes.
hard-boiled eggs, avocados, apples, celery, like these are fast foods,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Agreed. Oh, I'm gonna have to
So
try that. That sounds really good.
yeah, and it's so fast. It's really easy. I'll get the avocados too at Costco.
Yeah.
Sometimes when they're really hard, what I do is I leave them on the counter for like 2 or 3 days, and when they start to soften, then I'll put them in the fridge.
Mm,
So
yeah.
then they can get a longer life out of them.
Yeah. Love Costco.
Yeah, I know. So then they have so many more organic options now,
Yeah, I know.
which
It's
is
amazing.
it's so great. Especially, I mean, I'm in California, so I go to the farmers markets and stuff like that, and very fortunate that we have food year round here that you can just go pick up. But I do think I'm from Michigan, so I
Yeah.
understand, the winter months, but having a local Costco or, a local health food store that's bringing in that produce and those options, I mean, we are really fortunate to be able to have access to some of these foods year round now
Yep. Totally.
compared. But, canning and frozen options
Yeah.
are good as well. So, there's always a way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kaylee, thank you so much for joining us today on the Happy Whole You podcast. Can you please let everyone know where they can connect with you?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram mostly. It's at Kaely RD. And my name is spelled weird. It's Kaely. And my website is the same, KaelyRD.com. And you'll find a lot of free educational resources and different ways my team and I can help support you in different capacities.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.